Okay, so I've set the recording. So hi everyone. For those of you that I've not met, I'm Cassie. I'm the CEO at March of the Living UK. It's really great to have all of you here today. I can see lots of the different youth movements represented. I can see some of our alumni, some of our educators, some of our survivors. So it's really brilliant that we've kind of brought you all together this evening. We are very lucky to be joined by Miryam from Israel. Miryam has been with us I think 8 times on March of the Living, but has been leading trips to Poland for over 2 decades, mainly diaspora youth, but also Israeli group. She's also trained educators. She's run a lot of the gap year programs in Israel, and came from a youth movement background herself, and now lives on Kibbutz Ashbal in the north of Israel, which is an educators kibbutz. And she is going to talk to us today about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, specifically the youth movement's role in that. So I'm going to hand over to Miryam. Miryam, do you want to just unmute yourself?
I'm trying. I'm unmuted. Hey, can you all hear me? Good. Okay, so what I would like to start off is saying that the problem with Zoom is that it's not as interactive as I like to do my guiding in March of the Living. But we'll try and push in a few, every once in a while, a bit of time to relate and answer questions. As Cassie said, I grew up in a youth movement. I am part of a social movement in Israel called Dror Israel. And today I am an editor in a news site called The Val. I was asked to speak to you about the youth movements and the youth movement's uprising in the Holocaust, which is a story that is not as well known. Cass, could you put on a lovely PowerPoint presentation? Hope you guys don't have that much high expectations of this whole thing. Yeah. So basically, I don't think the guy to your right needs introducing, but the woman is not as well known. Her name is Tivia Lubetkin. She was the Mazkira, a movement worker in a movement called Dror in Poland. Massive leader in the Jewish community in the Warsaw Ghetto and a leader of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And I would like to make the case that the codes of the youth movement, as represented by Tivia Lubetkin and others, is the complete opposite of the codes of the Nazi world, as represented by Hitler and others. And I will try and do that. Cass, you can go to our next slide. Through talking about not the way the Nazis treated the Jews, but rather the way the Nazis treated each other, their own kind. These are pictures from the T4 operation or euthanasia, and it kind of shows what we talk about when we talk about the codes of the Nazi world. I don't know if you know, but the mass murders weren't started on Jews as such. It was actually executed first off on Germans who were determined, not viable, not as a burden to the Aryan race. In this pamphlet to the left, you can see a statement saying it costs 60,000 Reichsmark to maintain this guy alive. This money is also yours. And to the right in the picture, you can see a truck that took people who were hospitalized either for being mentally ill or handicapped in some way, or had all sorts of issues and were hospitalized or institutionalized, and they were taken on trucks to gas chambers. So the killing in gas chambers started actually on Aryans themselves. The Nazi doctors declared that 1 out of 4 babies born in Aryan babies born shouldn't be left to live, should be exterminated, murdered on the spot. Another thing that is, again, not as well known, Cassie, can you move to the next one, is that the concentration camps started out not as something that Jews were sent to. For 5 years until 1938, until the Kristallnacht, late into 1938, the concentration camps, Jews don't get sent there as Jews. They're sent there if they're socialist or communist or gay. That's the only reason. And the Nazis start out by 5 years of cleansing their own race out of unwanted material. Next picture. These are pictures from Dachau. It's the first concentration camp. It was set up in March 1933, 2 months after Hitler's rise to power. And everything we know about, I think, concentration camps are the epiphany of the peak of what it means to be a Nazi, and the order, the efficiency, that everyone needs to be the same. It's a crowd. There's no relationships between the people. People are being made to fight each other, survival of the fittest. All these codes are implemented first off on the Germans themselves. I'm trying just to kind of explain what these codes are through these examples, but it's looking at people as commodities. Are these babies that are deemed to be unworthy of living, right? They're non-productive. They're a burden, an economical burden. I don't know what kind of burden, but they're a burden on the Aryan race. They stop us from developing to where we need to be. That's the way the Nazi propaganda portrayed it. And the terror, and the starvation, and the limiting of resources, and making everyone compete against each other. These are the Nazi codes. And then when we get to, Cass, it's a good idea to move to the next one. When we get to the way they treat the Jews, it's even more clear. But it's there already from 1933, the terror, the intimidation, the making, what's the terror pointed at? It's limiting people's choices and abilities to do different things with their lives. It's pushing them into these set roads that they're supposed to be walking on. And I want to move on now. Like, you know what? No, sorry. Cass, go back and I'll move on with this. I want to ask you, Cass, can you get rid of the presentation for a sec? Just from everything you know, a few examples for the Nazi codes you understand from everything we've seen and in general. What are the Nazi? I'm asking this because why is this important? Because afterwards we try to understand what's the opposite. Any ideas? No, too shy still to talk?
If anyone wants to speak, write in the chat and we'll unmute you. Do you want to maybe just clarify the question you're asking, Miryam?
Yeah. Nazi world, we all know that it's evil, but what's so evil about it? Try and break it into codes that conduct day-to-day reality in the Nazi world. Do you understand the question? No. Cass, let's go back to the presentation, and I'll try and give you these words just to give kind of an example, but try and think about it because we will get to try and understand the opposite. The Nazi world is seen best, I think, in the camps. And as I said, the camps aren't designated just for Jews. They get to the Jews only by 1938. But the ghetto is also, to some extent, the same codes are the reality in it. Divide and conquer is a good example. So what do you do in the Warsaw Ghetto? Warsaw Ghetto is the biggest ghetto on Europe's soil. There's almost 500,000 people there. Most are from Warsaw. Some are around 360,000 Jews are from Warsaw itself, and another around 120,000 Jews are brought from nearby towns. And they're brought into an area that is so small that there's 9 people in a room. We're talking about 30% of the general population in something like 2.4% of the overall metropolitan area. It is very, very small. It's also the oldest neighborhood, bad infrastructure, as is, it's a challenge. And a good example for the way they do the hierarchy thing and the divide and conquer, which is so dominant in the Nazi culture, is, I don't know if you can see, Cassie, maybe you can point it out. There's the small ghetto and the big ghetto. Now, this is a test for Cassie to see how well she paid attention to all my talking in Warsaw. So the big one is the big one is the one on, yes, exactly. And you see where there's like this almost half cut in the end? Down there is a smaller ghetto. If you understand the Nazi codes, it will be clear to you that in the smaller ghetto, prominent Jews would be put. Jews who are deemed as more productive for the Nazi goals, that can serve the Nazis better, and they gain some better conditions, slightly better conditions. And the Jews in the large ghetto, in Ghetto B, are already know their stance. It helps to create the divide and conquer atmosphere that Jews understand that in order to survive, they need to fight against each other. This is something very strong the Nazis do everywhere they are. And by the way, including inside SS headquarters, with different fractions in the SS having the same responsibilities, so they quarrel among themselves, and there's one survivor of the fittest that goes on to advance in the hierarchy. But it's a reality where this hierarchy, this competitiveness, this productivity issue is always there. You can see to the left in the small picture, kids smuggling food through the walls, above the walls. You can see that the walls started off 2 meters high and wasn't high enough, so they were told to, the Jews were made to add at their own expense and on their own work another meter. And the conditions in the ghetto are very, very severe. For the first year, a fifth of the population, around 100,000 people, die without the Nazis shooting too many bullets. It's basically starvation, typhus, diseases, cold, lack of infrastructures, and people just drop dead in the street. And that leads us to the next pictures, Cassie. There's 2 pictures here, again, showing the way the Nazi codes are pushing the Jews to act in a certain way. Listen, I don't know about what you see in the picture to our right, the guy with the nice hat and jacket on. Is a Judenrat official. That's the only thing we know for sure about this picture, but there's a good likelihood that this picture is staged by the Nazis to show that there's some Jews starving and some Jews are living well in these conditions. And it was the truth, but it was the truth as the Nazis themselves. It's like blaming the victim, yeah, making the Jews look bad. So the picture is probably part of Nazi propaganda, trying to show how the Jews are so inhumane to each other. The pile of bodies of people starved to death, and the guy that is looking healthy and well. But it's also a reality that the Nazis are creating on purpose. For example, in the ghetto, the Nazis always appoint a Judenrat like the capos in the camps. The whole idea behind them is that the Jews are made to carry out the dirty work that the Nazis are making them do. It's again an element of divide and conquer. And to the left, the picture shows you the crowd. I always say it's walking down a street in the Warsaw Ghetto was a bit like walking in Oxford Street right before Christmas, with the queues and the rush and everyone in a hurry and annoyed, plus add starving and sick. But I also assume Oxford Street doesn't look like that these days, but also that I think it's part of seeing that you're always part of a crowd, but it's never a community. The Nazis are trying to break down communities. So the best example I can give for that is that in the beginning, families would try and look out for, the widowed mother, the orphaned niece, the friend from school who got sent from a nearby town and came with nothing to Warsaw. But gradually, ghetto life teaches you that you can't take care of your own children. So don't try and take care of strangers. Learn to ignore homeless people on the street. Learn to ignore starving people next to you. Hide your food even from family members. That's what the Nazis are trying to do. So there's you're never alone, but you're also never connected. And that's to a large extent the reality in the ghetto. Cass, I think the next one. So all of this was a bit of a background to try and explain A, Nazi world and Nazi codes, and B, a contrast to what the youth movements were dealing with. Now, maybe a minute of what is a youth movement. Youth movement is funny enough, is a German and Jewish concept. It's not the British Scouts, which are a youth organization. Youth movement is a club, an organization that is run by youth to the youth, and is very, in its nature, it's very revolutionary compared to, it's not preparing you to adapt well into grown-up life, it prepares you to change grown-up lives. And it hit well into societies. It's a modern concept, yeah, because you needed to have youth, and that's another long story. But youth movements hit well in Germany, worked really well there. The Wandelvogel was the first ever youth movement, and from then on, the Jewish Germans took it and ran with it all through Europe. And before you know it, every city had at least 12 different youth movements competing with other youth movements about what they believed in and who ran better summer camps and who had a better vision for the future for the Jewish people. So the youth movement, funny enough, a lot of them were relatively in a safe place because they realized what was going on in 1939 when the Nazis are invading Poland. They understand what's going on and they flee like any normal person, any person who had the means and the understanding to try and flee to the east. Not in every moment. There's so many reasons why people couldn't flee to the east, but they fled to the east. What they did that is completely abnormal is that they realized that they left behind chanichim, their members, their students, and as counselors, they said, we can't leave behind our kids. We need to go back there. So the really not normal thing they did was go back from relative safety in Soviet Union to Poland that is conquered by the Germans at that stage. And it is unbelievable and unprecedented and already crazy. And what they do when they get there, Tivia, if we go back to Tivia Lubetkin from the first, my personal hero, my personal madricha, also a counselor, role model, mentor. What does she do? She's in the East. She gets a letter from Warsaw describing the reality. Then she said, "They need me. I'm the movement worker. I need to go back and start organizing things." So she makes her way from Russia to Germany. I have to say that again because it's unbelievable. She makes her way to, and she's not the only one. There's tens of them going back, and then she sets up. She says she looks around. She says hi to everyone. She sees where everyone is, and then she said, "Okay, where are we needed? What should we be doing in the community?" And the first thing she does with her friends is set up a soup kitchen, which is the obvious thing. People are starving. People are coming from with no belongings because they're dragged from here and there. And also Warsaw is already bombed by German planes, and 8% of it is already rubble. And she just starts up a soup kitchen. And cast next picture. And the next step, being an educational movement, is not just feeding people, but actually, okay, we're youth movement. What are we going to do? We need madatzim. Now, I'm going to use words, and if they're not clear, just ask on the chat or anything. But madatzim is young counselors, people 16, 15, 14, that are leading younger children, 8, 10, 9. Yeah, these are kind of the ranges. And they run a seminar that trains educators, basically. They even smuggle 60 members into Warsaw. They smuggle them in, people. I don't know if you understand what that means under curfew. And it's not nice. I know we kind of feel like, at least for me, like lockdown in Israel felt like I'm suddenly thinking, okay, I wanted to go visit, wherever you want to go somewhere, and you know you're going to have a roadblock in the way and you don't know if you can pass it or not, and it's like, it's crazy. But it's not, it's getting shot. If you get found, it's getting shot. And they smuggle 60 teenagers into Warsaw to run a training seminar for educators. And then they set up a high school called Dror High School. And these people don't end it with that. Cast next picture. Oh, yes, this one. This is a picture before Warsaw Ghetto time. This is called Training Farm. Chavat Achshara, Training Kibbutz, agricultural farm, teaching members of Zionist youth movements to farm and work the land in Hebrew and all these kind of educational activities, preparing them for immigration, aliyah to Israel. What are we talking about training farms in Warsaw? Well, someone needs to create food for the food kitchens, right? So we'll send our people and we'll create training farms in the outskirts of Warsaw. And there's 2 like that around Warsaw. And Tivia describes them as places where people could stand straight for a bit. Breathe different air, both real and mentally. Be in a reality where the oppressor isn't always on you. And they provided food for the ghetto, which is another thing they did. Cast next one. The next thing, I don't know if you understand, if I can explain in such a short time how amazing it is, but what the youth movements did is that they sent women, because men were slightly more easy to trace as Jews. You just had to take off their pants. They sent women with fake ideas who looked Aryan or thought they looked Aryan. Tivia's best friend, Funka, looked completely Jewish, had a Hebrew, had a Yiddish accent, so her Polish wasn't, sounded Hebrew. It's like, I don't know if you ever notice when someone has a Jewish accent. I don't think it exists today, but it really mattered what was your original, like your mother tongue. And they need, the couriers, the women who were traveling, needed to look Aryan, look non-Jewish, and have a good accent that is not Jewish. and they needed fake ideas. And they needed to act as if they don't care when the Jew next to them in the train gets kicked off the train and dogs are sent to bite them. Yeah, it's a really difficult mindset. But why were these couriers so critical? Because information was everything. People didn't know what was going on 20 kilometers away from them. The radio was controlled by the Germans and was taken, confiscated. Telephones, the few that were existing, didn't provide good information. It wasn't something that you could know what was going on. Newspapers weren't allowed into the ghetto. So sending these women all across Poland, all across Europe actually, to gather information, understand what's going on in different ghettos, understand the reality better through their actions, is a massive act of not letting the Nazis limit your understanding of the reality to the just next moment, how will I survive the next moment? It gives them a broad understanding, which is something the Nazis invested a lot of energy denying from everyone, from the Nazis themselves, from non-Jews, from Jews, all across Europe. And the last picture here is one of my favorites. This is a booklet. I don't know if the youth movement members who are here have this thing of preparing hadricha booklets, with ideas for counselors, for madrichim, for what they're going to be doing in the summer camps or in their programs. The final Gvura is a newspaper / educational resource / book that chronicles pain and heroism all across Jewish history, trying to give these young people a historical perspective of what's going on in our Jewish history and how to understand the reality today according to the history that they knew of. So they chose they created very carefully, edited actually very carefully, stories to kind of bring this narrative of pain and heroism to give the people hope, perspective, understanding of the reality that they're in. Why am I telling you all of this? I think we wouldn't have known all of this if the final act didn't occur. And that's for our next slide. 1942, July 1942, the Nazis go into the Warsaw Ghetto and they start liquidating it. They send through 5-6 weeks, or the summer of 1942, they there's arguments about the number, but let's say 250,000 Jews to their death in Treblinka. If you've been with me or with someone else, Treblinka is not a concentration camp or labor camp. It's just a death facility. It's very small, and in less than a year, it managed to murder almost 1 million people. For comparison, Auschwitz, it took them 4 years to murder, more or less, to murder 1.5 million people, because part of what they did in Auschwitz was exploit people's labor. Well, Treblinka is just about death, which is also a strong code of the Nazi reality. So basically 250,000 people, Jews from Warsaw, are sent to their death in Treblinka. And after a week, everyone in the ghetto knows what Treblinka is. By the way, because the couriers we were talking about, the women, the youth women, the young women going out with their with their fake ideas, went to the train station near Treblinka and started asking the people living there what's going on, and they knew. And they said the trains are going in full and they leave the camp. The trains are empty and full of clothes. So everyone understands what's going on, and the youth movement members don't know what to do. They're walking around, their family members are taken, their friends are taken. It's hectic, it's crazy, it's traumatic, it's the worst you can imagine, and they don't know what to do. But they make a decision to establish what they call the Jewish Fighting Organization. Now, they don't call it, the Jewish Fighting Organization is a combined underground of all the fighting forces in the ghetto, almost all, sorry. The revisionist, the right-wing Beitar youth movement set their own underground, which is called the ETSI, the Jewish Military Organization, and they cooperated. They weren't together, but they cooperated to some extent. And what the youth movements did was start to prepare for an uprising. Because what they said is, listen, it's either we die in the gas chambers in Treblinka, or we die with bullets in the streets of Warsaw. There's no hope left. The only hope is to define the way we go. By the way, in other places, in Hungary, for example, the youth movement saw hope, and they saw that they could help people escape. So that's what they did. And they were very active in helping tens of thousands of Jews through forged documents or finding ways to escape. So you got different responses, but in Warsaw, in 1943, they say there's no, it's a wholesale, because they had couriers going all across Europe, they could know that it's a wholesale murder. It's not just going on in Vilna or in Lithuania or in Warsaw. It's something that is all across Europe. They're going to kill each and every one of us. They understood the final solution before the final solution was defined by the Nazis. At least before the Wannsee Committee. They're talking about a final solution that the Nazis are applying for the Jews. And it's going to be wholesale murder. So the only thing left is to decide how we're going to die. And for 3 weeks, first off, January 1943, the Nazis come in again into the Warsaw Ghetto, and they want to liquidate the ghetto and take all the Jews to Treblinka. And the youth movement members, they've got 2 companies already of fighters. Between them, they've got something like 10 rifles, but they manage. The first company, headed by Mordechai Anilevich, later on known as the commander of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. They are taken, they're Hashomer Tzair, if you know the movement, a company, and they're taken down to the streets. And they don't know what to do because, they're not fighters. They're good Jewish kids. And they're led to the Umschlagplatz, to the transportation square. And when they get near there, they realize it's now or never, and they take their weapons out of their coats and they start shooting. And the Jews with them manage to escape, and most of them get killed. Mordechai Anilevich is the only surviving person out of this company. And another company sees what's going on and says, you know what? Actually, it's not really effective if we go down to the street. We need to figure out some kind of smart way of guerrilla fight inside the building. And they seat one of the guys with a book, a Shalom Aleichem book, and he reads a book. And the Germans, they're used to Jews not fighting, so they just run across him. But he's hiding a gun behind the book. And in the other room, there's 3 other guys with guns, and they just the Germans are caught in crossfire. And Yitzhak Katzenelson, Yitzhak Zuckerman, who is one of the commanders, says it was a mind shift because they thought that the Germans are gods, are superhuman, that they've got. It's you're not really going to be able to kill them. All we're going to do is just make a stand for history's sake, and that's all we can do. Well, once they shot them, they said, wow, they're human like us. And they can die like we die all the time. And then they make a run for it for the roofs, and the Nazis are running after them. But then they say, hey, it's our roofs. We know where to hide. We know what to do. And they just wait and push the Germans off the roof. And it's a mind shift that we can actually kill these people. And that allows them, and it's a 3 days thing. And after 3 days, the Nazis retreat from the Warsaw Ghetto. Why do they retreat? Basically, not because the fighting is so scary for them. The Jewish fighters are weak. They've got around, amongst them, they've got something like 20 guns at the max. But the Germans are afraid that the Poles are going to be inspired by what the Jews do, and it's going to end up backfiring on the Germans and getting a serious uprising, which they can't handle because they knew that the Polish underground is strong and effective. In Passover of 1943, it's April, 19th of April that year, the Germans come again better prepared. What do I mean better prepared? They've got planes, they've got tanks, they bring in a decorated general called General Stroop to liquidate the Warsaw Ghetto. Officially, they admit to it taking them 3 weeks. People, it took them 3 weeks to conquer Poland, yeah? We know that there were people fighting even 7 and 8 months after the Germans declare Warsaw Ghetto deserted. For the first 4 days, the youth movement fighters, the Jewish fighting organization, manages to hold back tanks and seasoned soldiers. They might not have a lot of guns, but they've got a lot of students who went to study chemistry and engineering, and so they hide, they invent their own grenades and their own bombs, and they figure out where to hide mines in the street that it will cause the maximum damage to the Nazis. And they basically for 4 days they hold the Germans out of the Warsaw Ghetto. Then the Germans, as you can see in the picture to your right, they start burning down the buildings. And conditions there begin to be very, very severe. The Nazis see this uprising as such a big blow. The picture to your right, in the bottom, I don't know if you can imagine, but this is how the Warsaw Ghetto looked like. It's all rubble. Why? The idea was to completely bring it to the ground, wipe it out, not to leave any reminder of the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw. And the picture on the bottom is how the ghetto looks like after the rebellion. And again, still in these conditions for 7 months, people still fight. Cassie, next picture. A few things about how hello. Agnes, you need to. Thank you. Okay, a few pictures to show us how the way they fought in this uprising is this massive defiance of the Nazi codes, and they're all youth movement codes. So first off, my personal favorite, gender issues. You see the picture to the left? These are women warriors, movement members, and they got caught. This is a picture where they got caught. And General Stroop, heading the Nazi force, liquidating the ghetto, talks about the women fighters. Basically, it blows their minds. The fact that women are fighting, and the fact that they're doing so successfully. They talk about women hiding grenades in their or guns in their skirts, and even when they're caught, they keep fighting and throwing grenades from the rooftops. And it's something that the Nazis can't comprehend. And why is that a youth movement code? Because I just told you that Tivia Lubetkin Tivia Lubetkin was a mazkira, was a movement worker. was the head of the movement, the head of the movement in Poland. For a woman in 1938 to hold that position, it's something very massive, the gender equality compared to that time. And I think it's something that is in its own right. I don't know if you know, but the Nazis said that there's 3 Ks to describe the place of the woman in society. Kinder, Kirchen, and I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, in Kirk. It's children, kitchen, and the church. That's what women are supposed to be worried about. Well, I don't think these girls were into the kitchen or the shul that much. They were really working very hard to make a better future for children, but I think it's a complete contrast to the place Nazis give to women in their society. The second thing why I think this whole uprising is completely youth movement oriented is the picture, Cassie, I don't know if you can, the upper left one, just point at it. The one in the middle standing is Abba Kovner. I'm not going to tell you who he is, but it's a poet and a leading commander. And this picture is about its partisans rising, but this is what it is. It's a bunch of people who have gone to summer camps and they ate together and stayed friends, and then led together programs. And then they ended up finding themselves in the middle of World War II and the Holocaust, and they had to do something about it. But they still kept this kind of feeling of solidarity and camaraderie, and just a bunch of people having fun. Tivia Lubetkin talks about the Passover, their Seder night during the uprising, and she talks about the skits and the icebreakers that they play. It's a youth movement, and they don't, the company, which we say a company fought, it's not a company, it's 20 people who know each other and love each other and take care of each other. And they might have amongst them only 5 weapons, but they're still going to be fighting together because that's what they do. It's not about effectiveness, it's not about productivity, it's about the relationships and people and doing things together and being committed to each other and never leaving people behind. The third element is actually the hardest to say, to explain. I'll give it a try. You see the picture to your right with the 3 guys fighting, and they look like they know what they're doing, and they know how to hold the guns and stuff. This is not a picture from the Jewish the Warsaw Uprising, but from the Polish Warsaw Uprising that happened in 1944, later on. The Polish underground didn't want to give guns and ammunition to the Jewish underground, to the Jewish fighting organization. You know why? Because they told them Jews don't fight. And Tivia herself says, our mechanism of survival for 2,000 years of living in diaspora, or in exile, that's how she calls it, and at that time it is exile, is simple. You either migrate away when it gets difficult, or you pay them out, or you're smarter than them. That's how you manage to deal with anti-Semitism and persecutions and difficult economical settings where it's very hard to survive and make a living. And that's how Jews survived. And what did we, she says that for her, the hardest thing, the inner battle, was even harder than battling against the Germans. Because why? Because she says, what do we do as Jews in a crisis? We try and take care of the elderly. We care for the children. We take in the refugees. We show solidarity. But we wait for the storm to pass. And what we need to understand, and there's a very strong sentence, which if I was better equipped technologically to add, I'd put from Schindler's List, where the Nazi SS, where the SS officers tells Oskar Schindler, they think they can weather the storm, but this is the SS storm. They can't weather us. This storm they can't weather. And it took the Jews a long time to understand that this is not affairs as usual. And the youth movements, at least Tivia writes it very explicitly, that acting so differently than the way she was brought up was one of the hardest acts of resistance she had to do. So that's it for that. And I just want to read to you one last thing that Tivia Lubetkin wrote. This is out of her memoir. What gave us this moral strength? We were able to endure the life in the ghetto because we knew that we were a collective, a movement. Each of us knew that they weren't alone. Every other Jew faced his fate alone, one man before the overpowering, invincible enemy. And this is something that the Nazis are doing on purpose. From the very first moment until the bitter end, we stood together as a collective, as a movement. The feeling that there was a movement, a community of people who cared about each other, who shared ideas and morals, made it possible for each of us to do what we did. Cassie, I think we can move back to this. I want to sum it up, and then I want to open up for questions. I try to show you the Nazi codes, and anyone who's been in a youth movement knows that order is not a stronghold of youth movements, but community is, and values are, and standing up for what you believe in and acting upon it, and creating a counterculture. So the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and by the way, there are 8 other uprisings like it, just not as well known, in Krakow and in Benadin and in Częstochowa. There's other uprisings, also in Auschwitz. I didn't know that, but I dug in a bit deeper and I found out that the woman who smuggled gunpowder for the uprising in Auschwitz were all movement members. Some of them got caught uprising in different cities and were sent to Auschwitz there, and then they kept fighting. So the role of the youth movements isn't as well known in the uprising. It's sad, but I think what's even more sad is the lack of understanding that what's important to understand is that the codes of the youth movement of solidarity and commitment and equality between people, less hierarchy than we find even in normal society, is a massive resistance in its own right to what the Nazis were trying to enforce, the role the Nazis were trying to impose on the Jews. Questions, thoughts, remarks? Cassie, are you proud of me? I'm on time.
Sorry. If anyone wants to comment or if anyone's got any questions, just put
I think Agnes is raising her hand.
Oh, Agnes, hold on.
I have 2 questions and a comment. One is, what were the ages of these people? It was both sexes, you made the point. And certain jobs were best done by women and others by men, and some had to look like Aryans and so on. I understand all that. But what are the ages, and how long did it take for the organization to get together to start being fighters it started when the ghettos were formed. They started soon after to organize themselves. But how long did it take before they started to fight? And once I have your answers, I shall have a comment. Go on.
So the ages range from the oldest one. Tivia is amongst the oldest, and she starts the war when she's 24. She ends it when she's 31. And one of the most famous warriors, Kazik, in Warsaw, was 16 in 1943. So you had people between the age of 14 to the age of 27, 28 when the uprising is on. How long does it take them to get organized? Tivia says that this is something that she will carry as a remorse, as a regret, as a huge regret for all her life, because it takes them a long time to say that it's not possible to listen. Warsaw, in Vilna, the youth movements escaped to the forest to fight there as partisans. There's no forest around Warsaw. It's not feasible. In Budapest, I told you about this, the youth movement helped people escape. You can't escape from Warsaw in Poland in 1943. And in Krakow, they helped them find a place in the non-Jewish area because it's easier to go in and out of the ghetto. Saying to yourself, we're all going to die, it's just a matter of choosing how to die. Because listen, people, grown-ups, were telling them, if you uprise, they're going to kill us all. And their answer was, they're going to kill us all anyway. We might as well try and make a point of it. Yeah. And now your comment?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? I was asked on various occasions when I talk to people whether the ghetto experience that I had included uprising or not. And the answer was not at all. You refer to the Budapest ghetto. The Budapest ghetto was different from everything else. 500,000 people from the provinces went into first ghettos and then to Auschwitz finished. And my experience is this provincial experience. And there was, to my understanding, never any shadow of uprising. So when I was asked why it was, I tried to manufacture answers. And I had two answers, and I wonder whether you think that this is correct. One, that out of the Hungarian Jews, they had already taken the young men away from 17 years onwards. They were already in the Ukraine, most of them dead. So those who might have been the most likely people to be active in an organization like this, they had already been extracted from the society. That was one reason. And the other reason was that the whole experience was so into a few weeks that there was no chance to know is whether you think that these are valid reasons or were there other reasons. Were we just, exactly right what you said, we cared about the old, we cared about the babies, we cared about the families, and we hope that the whole thing is going to pass. That is exactly the mentality. Is it because we were feeble, or is it because we didn't have a chance?
Any city that didn't have time to, any ghetto that didn't have time to gather information, understand what's going on, you couldn't have an uprising there, but that's one thing. I think you pinpointed the reasons completely. And I usually say it, and you know, you've heard me say it, Agnes, when we were together in Poland. Acts of resistance were everywhere. Unbelievable acts of heroism and resistance in helping, as you said, helping. It's not obvious to help the babies and the older people. It's not obvious. And it's an act of resistance because it's exactly what the Nazis are trying to get you to do. And I also think that part of the reason that the youth movements in the Warsaw Ghetto were so successful is because they managed to get the population with them. And they did it, by the way, Tzivia gets a lot of points for that because they start up the soup kitchen. They don't stay in the mentality of we're taking care only of the youth movement, they care for the community. Now, if you don't have people in that position who have the time to organize and to get people to trust them as committed to the community, you're not going to have an ability for someone to say, listen, the Nazis want us to, are putting a divide and conquer act on us, we should unite. You can't have that if you don't have people who, and by the way, until January 1943 in Warsaw, the youth movements weren't trusted like that. But from why did they call it the Jewish Fighting Organization? Because they got the masses to uprise. Everyone hid in bunkers. Everyone had axes or knives or some kind of weapon, cold weapon that they could, when the Nazis would come and take them out of the bunkers, they would participate in the fighting in what they had and what they could do. It takes years to get to that position and create that. When my family came from one of my family came from Lithuania, and it happens there in 3 weeks, and it's done. You can't organize anything in 3 weeks. You just don't understand what's going on. Yeah. Do we have any other thoughts or questions?
Thanks, Miryam. That was amazing, especially how you kind of showed us the evolution of this youth movement's revolution and their role from, culture and education to then welfare and eventually physical resistance. My question is about these, you talked about them being the youth movements and being leaders. What was their interaction with the formal Jewish leadership, the Judenrat, appointed by the Nazis? That's my first question. And then my second question is just more personal, because you described Tzivia as like a personal role model and madrucha. What do you learn? What should we learn from her about how we live our lives? Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Brilliant questions. You guys asked such good questions. I'll start with the first one. Tzivia was a political figure. Same, Frumka was the same. Her best friend was a movement worker with her. They were well known in the community. They had a lot of connections with Emanuel Ringelblum from the Oneg Shabbat archive. And Cassie, you guys had a talk with Lise from the Zhich. Also, it's all intertwined. Emanuel Ringelblum was one of their biggest supporters. So they had two serious leadership figures in the community, Emanuel Ringelblum and the poet Yitzchak Katzanerson, who supported them full-heartedly. But they had also a lot of other connections with other people in the ghetto. The Judenrat, by the second year, was off limits. It was completely understood that there's nothing to gain from a relationship with them, that it's dangerous, and that they are, most of them in Warsaw were deemed by the population as corrupt and as dangerous. And so that's it. And to your second question, my answer is, I learn that solidarity. You always need, if you want to do it, if you want to create a change, you need to work together with other people. You need to create networks. You need to create a community. This is what you need to be doing in your life, and if you want to create any kind of change. And it's funny because I was talking about this with Cassie just recently. I hope that anyone that came with me to Poland and got exposed to these people will be influenced the same way as I was, to push myself a bit further. Now, I can always do a bit more. I had the pleasure and the honor of being with Agnes in Poland last year, and she basically told me and the kids, they're not kids, they're young adults, but anyway, She basically told us, don't be lazy. You can always do more. Only a bit more, but we don't need to fight the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, thank God. But there's always things we can do. And I think a youth movement, and I think any person needs to, we've got a pandemic going on, need to be asking themselves, what can I do more? Where can I push myself a bit further on and do a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more, and reality will change for the better. So that's what I'm taking from them. We need to wrap up, Cassie tells me.
Thank you. Miryam, that was absolutely fascinating. I've heard that many times before, and each time I'm still hanging on your every word. So thank you for sharing that with us. I hope I can see on here people representing all different youth movements, and I hope that some of you can take parts of what Miryam was saying and kind of identify in your youth movement today what are the challenges, and like we were saying, we're going through a global pandemic, and what is the youth movement's response, and as members, what can you do, and can you do that little bit more? So I think we always say we should take inspiration in order to impact our actions for the future. So I think this specifically is very relevant at the moment. So thank you. Also thank you for Agnes. For those of you that haven't met Agnes but maybe got a little bit of a taster, Agnes is a Holocaust survivor, a Hungarian Holocaust survivor who comes with us on March of the Living. From lots of the names, I can see that there was quite a lot of you on this call that were meant to be coming with us this year and obviously couldn't, and we really do hope that in April you will all be joining us again. And for those of you that haven't been on March of the Living, I would really encourage you to think about coming. Miryam is one of our educators, Agnes is one of our survivors, and I guess this was a bit of a taster of how our education is tailored to young adults and to youth movement members on the programme, in order to not only educate yourselves and learn, but also to be inspired and hopefully come back to England or wherever you're going back to with more knowledge, but also more kind of for action and want to do something. And I guess on that theme, I'd just like to say that I know a lot of the youth movements and individuals, parts of different organisations, have got a very challenging summer ahead with a lot of unknowns as whether camps, machanot, programmes that you are going to be running will be going ahead and in what format they will be going ahead in. But I'd just like to put out an offer from March of the Living that if you do require any content that's relevant, specifically I guess Holocaust education, whether it's online, whether it's us coming somewhere socially distant, or however you're going to do it, whether it's helping us prepare resources for your madrachim, however you feels fit, the offer's there, we're happy, we don't charge for it. So if there is any way that we can help with your summer programs, whatever they end up being, please be in touch. I'll post my email address on this chat so everyone has it, so if anybody does want to get in touch. And also if you're not on our mailing list and came via youth movement and want to be put on the mailing list so you hear about our future programs and trips, please just drop me an email and I will add it on. So thank you. And we've more or less kept to time. I'm just going to put my email address before everyone leaves. Perfect. Yeah, and thank you. It was really great to see so many people join us and to have everyone with us. I'm going to stop the recording, but you can feel free to go. If anybody wants to hang out and chat to people, you're more than welcome to.